The noise woke him up well after midnight. Getting hit. No, it was scratching. Low, muffled sounds were coming up through his bedroom floors. Again, Michael shut his eyes in the hopes that sleep would come back and take away the noise. But they wouldn't go away. They kept nagging at the edge of his awareness, pulling him awake against his will. He groaned as he rolled over and looked through the dark at the digital clock on his nightstand. He looked back at the green numbers and saw that they said 2:37. It's either too late or too early for any sounds that make sense to be shaking the house. The bedroom of his parents downstairs was as quiet as ever, as if no one had been there. What did that noise sound like? As Michael threw back the sheets and swung his legs over the side of the bed, he felt both curious and a little uneasy. The cold room gave him goosebumps on his bare arms. When he looked around, he was afraid that something bad might appear out of the shadows. He sighed and picked up the baseball bat that was lying next to his desk. Something scary could be in a dark house in the middle of the night. It's better to be safe than sorry. He cracked open his bedroom door while holding the bat tight and looked out into the empty hallway. Pale moonlight coming in through the end window was the only source of light. It cast spooky half images on framed photos and plants in pots on shelves. At first look, nothing seemed wrong. Michael couldn't get his breath out. One hand tightened its grip on the bat, and the other quickly ran to the light switch. When you hear the number 3, 1, 2, there are 3. The lights in the stairs came on, and their bright, clinical light chased away shadows from every corner. Michael took a deep breath to calm himself down. He then crept down the stairs, his feet squeaking on the cushioned treads. A dim yellow glow spread from the kitchen in the back of the house to the middle of the basement. There was movement inside, and that person wasn't meant to be there at all. With his weapon in hand and his fingers sweating, Michael moved closer to the source of the noise. The scratching sound of closets and drawers opening and closing got louder over time. No one or anything that was in his house was trying to be sneaky at this point. He felt angry and scared at the same time in his chest. He rushed into the kitchen from around the corner, hitting his bat high to land a devastating blow, and stopped in his tracks, his baseball bat lying at his side. There was no thief or intruder standing among the open cabinets and strewn out dishes. The hospital light showed a thin old woman with gray streaks in her hair that was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't surprised when he walked in. She just hummed a broken song under her breath as she rummaged through the stuff and sorted it in a useless way with shaking hands. Michael stared, shocked that his eyes were confirming the name that would always be in his mind. It's not possible after all those years and all the damage she caused. It was, though. His mom had come home. The confusion from the night before didn't get better in the morning. It seemed like the sunlight coming in through Michael's window only made the broken pieces of his once steady life stand out more. He rolled over in bed, the thin wail coming up through the floor, making his headache worse. He recognized her right away. His mother was awake and making herself known all over the house. The lament was broken up by a few faint sobs, and Michael felt cold and heavy fear in his stomach. He didn't know what to do with this woman who was falling apart and had jerked her way back into his life. Michael groaned and swung his feet over the edge of the cushion as he got ready to face the storm for the second time in as many hours. He put on an old t-shirt and sweatpants, but they didn't protect him much from the feeling of dread that came back like a tide. He hoped and even prayed that the chaos of last night had been a bad dream. But down in the happy yellow kitchen, the horror was still there in the form of wrinkly, messy skin. Michael gathered his strength and climbed down the stairs, holding onto the handrail until his fingers turned white. As soon as he turned the corner into the kitchen, the crying stopped. His mother was hunched over at the table, sobbing quietly. Next to them was a bottle of vodka that was only half full. When she got there the night before, she definitely wasn't completely sober. "Mom," Michael tried to say, but all he could do was rasp his words. It felt good to speak again, and he did so with more force. "What are you doing here?" There was no answer other than a slow hiccup. It gave Michael a chill when his mother raised her tear-stained, blotchy face and fixed him with a blank, glassy look. Those eyes, which used to be so full of life and fire, now only held the sounds of someone even more crazy. A chill went through him that had nothing to do with the early January chill. Michael said again, this time louder. I said, "What are you doing here?" He was angry and scared at the same time. You can't just barge in here after 10 years and act like nothing's changed. Seeing him yell made her eyes light up with recognition, and her thin body straightened with pride. "This is my house," she spat back, her voice rough but mean. "I'll do as I please, and I demand to know where your father has gotten off to." Michael held back an angry response, because he knew that being so hostile would only make things worse. For as long as he could remember, his parents' marriage had been bad because his mother was unstable and his father avoided problems. 10 years of being away and healing had, however, blurred the edges of the trauma that was remembered and let new growth cover wounds that were once too fresh to touch. Now that she was here, those scars were once again torn open, letting infection and bile into his carefully remade life. Panic set in, and memories that had been hidden for a long time came back to him like bile in his throat, sharp and dangerous. He worked hard to swallow them down. "Dad isn't here," Michael said quickly, trying to stay cool. "He lives in the city now, has a new family. It's just me." When his mother heard his empty answer, she let out a mad, sharp wail, and she fell back into her grief and anger. She screamed, "Liar," and slammed her weak hands on the table. "You're all liars. He would never leave me. Never." Michael fell backwards and automatically put his hands up to protect himself from the storm of distress and psychosis that was happening in front of him. But no one hit him. His mother had lost it again and was crying uncontrollably while rocking back and forth in her seat. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise in some way. Michael felt chills go through him as he realized how much his mother had changed. She wasn't feeling well, and maybe never had been. Now he was home by himself with her falling apart, and he had no idea what scary stitch would come undone next. Fear turned into ice in his blood. What did he plan to do? Michael dug up the last of his resolve and addressed his mother again that afternoon. He was determined to get some control over the situation before it got worse. After her outburst that morning, she had stayed calm, muttering and looking into space. That being said, there was a dangerously strong current of stress just below the surface. He found her stooped over in the living room, tearing tissues into tiny pieces that fell to the floor like stressed snowflakes. When she saw him coming, her eyes opened in a way that was almost funny, as if she hadn't really noticed his presence until that moment. Michael stopped just out of reach because he wasn't stupid enough to think she wasn't going to hurt him still. He said in the quietest voice he could make, "We need to talk. This is not how you should act. You must follow the rules in this house if you want to stay." A flash of anger crossed her face, but then she went back to being completely crazy. "Rules," she yelled. "Since when do you make the rules, boy? I am your mother. You will obey me." Michael's already heated anger boiled over when she refused to listen. He learned not to back down from conflict while working through his painful past in therapy for months. He did this so that unhealthy patterns would not happen again. But seeing this ghost of the woman who had given him nightmares as a child made his heart race. He yelled, "No." He hated how his voice was shaking, but he stood his ground. "You lost any right to control me when you walked out 10 years ago. I have a life here now, and I won't let you destroy it." His mother shakily stood up, her eyes narrowed into angry slits. She jumped out of nowhere and reached for his neck with her thin fingers. "Destroy it! I gave you life. Without me, you would be nothing." You would be nothing. You will show me respect, you ungrateful child." Even though Michael tried to dance away, her nails got a hold of him and dragged fire across his skin. As she let go of him, he felt blind panic and flashbacks of violent rages filled his thoughts until he lost his sense of reason. With a frown, he grabbed her wrists and pulled them away, pushing her smaller body back at the same time. She screamed in surprise and hit the wall, falling to the floor in a heap. For a shocked moment, they just looked at each other, like two souls that had grown apart, but were still connected by a painful past. Then her face twisted in anger, and she stumbled backwards along the walls like a wild animal, looking for a weapon. Michael felt like he wasn't within himself. He watched as his body sprung into action again, grabbing her swinging arms and pinning them behind her back with more force than was necessary. He leaned down and growled in her ear as she screamed and thrashed. "Enough. Do you hear me? I won't let you hurt me anymore." His mother stood still and gasped out loud at the harsh tone. His heart was racing, and his feelings were all over the place, but he held her there for a long time. Michael only then let her go and backed away carefully. "Go to the basement," he told them, but his voice was shaking so badly that it was hard to understand. "You'll stay down there until you've calmed down and are willing to cooperate. I'm done living in fear in my own home." He then turned on his heel and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, eager to get some space between them before the expected explosion. The awful wail of his mother followed him to his room, but he wouldn't look back. He had won tonight. Michael jumped out of bed and was soaked in cold sweat. Shadows of the nightmare were still hanging over his thoughts like wisps of fog. They were images of fingers grasping and memories being broken. He slowly brought his racing heart back to a more normal rate as his consciousness came back to full force. It was all in my head. At least that's what he told himself as the moonlight crept through the curtains and cast a soft glow on his familiar bedroom. There was no skewed image of his mother hiding in the background. For now, this house and the life he had built were safe. Michael groaned and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. He then sat down and put his hands over his head. His mind was still very much affected by the real disturbances of the past 2 days, making it hard for him to fall back to sleep after such a detailed disturbance. It was quiet downstairs. It's possible that his order from the night before had finally stuck because she slept without having any dreams. The thought didn't make me feel better. He also didn't think about what the new day might bring or his mother's sudden mood swings. His chest was as tight as a spring with anxious energy that begged to be let out. So, a walk. Fresh air and moving to get rid of any shadows that are still there. Anything was better than being trapped by fear inside these 4 walls any longer. Michael quickly put on a hoodie and trousers. He only stopped to grab his keys before sneaking out the front door. The night hugged him like an old friend, and the wind whispered softly through the empty tree branches. As he walked through the dark neighborhood streets, his thoughts kept going around and around in his head. Had he imagined the sounds of dark scratching that woke him up, or had he still been dreaming when he woke up? He felt a bad shiver go down his spine at the thought. He had too many questions that he couldn't answer about his unstable mother. He only knew for sure that her sudden return had opened up wounds that were just starting to heal and brought up a lot of memories and feelings that he wasn't sure he was ready to deal with. A white moving thing in Michael's peripheral vision woke him up from his deep thought. He looked away, blinked, and then looked again through the darkness. There was a note stuck to a neighbor's fence post with flapping tape. Even from far away, his name stood out in the scrawl. With his heart in his mouth, Michael grabbed it with hands that were shaking. The note said, "Dear son, I know you don't understand yet, but I'm only trying to fix what was broken. He broke up our family, but I won't let him. I will show you the truth if you meet me at dawn where it all started." Michael squished the paper together with fingers that were cold and bloodless. She had followed him into the night without being seen, leaving this scary message before disappearing again into the night. Even worse, the fact that she kept saying that their father was still the enemy made him very nervous. Even though dawn wasn't for hours yet, he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep any longer. The night had only just started to trick them. Michael barely remembered the path he took as night turned to dawn. His feet moved automatically as his mind swirled and churned. Sleep had been hard to find because his thoughts were going too fast and being too scattered to give him more than brief breaks. Now the dark shapes of trees loomed over him again, letting him know that he was coming. He had shown up. Michael stopped at the edge of the bush and looked around for any sign of movement. The only sound that broke the silence was the birds' morning calls. A single figure emerged from the fog in front of them. She was thin and pale, but she held herself with great pride. The pale face of his mother came into view, her eyes still bright from this far away. She had been ready. "You came," she said softly, her smile stretching her lips, which were already cracked and bleeding from her teeth. Michael made himself strong and walked into the grassy area. "I'm here. Now what do you want?" Her smile disappeared as soon as it came on, and a pinched snarl took its place. "I told you, you'll see the truth. About him, about all of them, and their lies. Come, it started here. Our beginnings and their betrayal." She gave him a sharp beckon and spun off into the forest without looking to see if he was following. Michael didn't think about it for long before jumping in, doubts and all. He was also looking for answers, but he was filled with fear about what they might look like. They went deeper into the woods, on a winding game trail that she seemed to be the only one who could see, without being able to see them. His mother moved with an unnatural ease for someone who was so tired. Michael kept up with her hard pace because he didn't want to be left behind. He was mentally and physically tired, but questions that had no answers pushed him forward. She finally stopped on top of a mossy hill with a view of a gentle depression covered in leaves. That's when he caught his breath. He knew this was the right place. His mind was filled with detailed memories of scenes from many years ago, making the present seem less important. A younger family laughed and played in the colors without having to worry about anything. The two of his parents smiled at him without anger and held hands that were much smaller than his. To warm and remember things, warmed up icy veins for a moment. Then his mother's angry screams broke the fantasy. As she clenched her teeth, she said, "See how he still lied to us. His pretty lies, convincing you I was the monster while he plundered our lives for his own." Her face turned red with anger and sadness, and the tone of her voice changed until a familiar fear rose up on its own. Michael put out hands to calm things down. Enough of this. Dad made his own choices, as we all must. Dwelling in the past changes nothing except to poison the present further. His calm voice made her even more angry. "Poison. I'll show you poison. You ungrateful wretch." She jumped at him without warning, her thin fingers aimed for his throat with a new level of craziness. But he was ready. He had been through enough of these outbursts to not be caught off guard again. Michael avoided her claws that were trying to grab him and quickly turned around, grabbing her arms from behind in a grip that couldn't be broken. She jerked and bucked like a wild animal while he held her, yelling and cursing incoherently. Even though his wrists were getting sore, he didn't give up. Finally, he became determined and resolved. They had both been hurt for too long by his mother's instability. The circle needs to be broken right now, for good. Michael leaned in close to say something in her ear. He used a soft but firm tone. "It's over. I'm letting the past go for good, and you have to do the same if you want any kind of future. Please, Mom." A beat of frail silence went by, and a small but fierce spark of hope appeared. Then, with a painful howl, she wriggled free and turned around to face him, with eyes that were wild and crazy again. "Never! I'll die before giving up. Do you hear me?" she screamed, grabbing a branch from the leaves to use as a stick. Michael stared in fear as he realized she was now out of his reach and out of his mind. He felt fear again, but not for himself. He had been through too much to give in to her crazy any longer. "Then you leave me no choice." Before she could swing the homemade weapon, he charged at her and threw her to the wet ground. She fought and bit like an animal trapped in a tight space, desperately twisting to run her nails down his cheek. Even though he was in pain, Michael kept his hold on her, pinning her arms above her head until her short, rough breaths stopped under him. Then he leaned down and locked eyes with her, his face both serious and soft. "I'm sorry, it had to be this way. But I won't let you destroy yourself or me anymore." After letting her go, Michael stood up, his legs shaking. His mother was still lying on the ground, limp and gasping for air. He couldn't say if it was because he was tired or because of something deeper, but the fear and anger had gone away for the first time in as long as he could remember. All that was left was a huge, booming void, and the first signs of peace came with it. He turned around and walked away, disappearing into the fog around him. Finally, the ghosts of his past stayed behind. Michael was ready to live in the present moment and the future that lay beyond the tight wound spring of his new start.